You know that feeling when your whole world just shifts? Mine imploded in my kitchen while I was making a turkey sandwich. My name is Paige, and for most of my life, I thought I had things pretty well mapped out. I was the kind of person who made lists, who planned ahead, who believed that if you worked hard and were good to people, life would give you a fair shake. I was building a life, a stable, comfortable life, one quiet day at a time. I was a project manager at a mid-sized tech company, good at organizing chaos, ironically. My home was my sanctuary, a place filled with cookbooks, comfortable furniture, and the quiet hum of a life I was proud of. And Mark was supposed to be the cornerstone of that life. This story starts in that kitchen, the heart of the home I thought we shared, and it ends at a very public, very fancy gala, where I finally got to rewrite the ending. But to understand how I got from packing lunches to serving legal papers in a ball gown, we need to go back to when Mark and I first met. It wasn't some grand romantic movie scene. We met at a friend's barbecue. He was charming, funny, confident, but not arrogant. He paid attention when I spoke, asked thoughtful questions. He felt easy, like slipping on a favorite pair of jeans. We talked for hours that first night about everything and nothing. We had similar ideas about the future, about family, about what mattered in life. He was building his career as a financial advisor, ambitious and driven. I liked that. I liked that he had goals, that he worked hard. It mirrored my own drive. We started seeing each other regularly, dinners, movies, just hanging out. It was comfortable, steady. No fireworks, maybe, but a deep growing warmth. That felt safer, more real somehow. Things moved pretty quickly looking back. Within a year, we were living together. Another year later, we were engaged. We got married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. It felt right. We bought a house, the house with the kitchen where the story takes its first real, brutal turn. We decorated it together, argued over paint colors and furniture, built flat-pack furniture late at night, laughing until we cried. We built a life, piece by piece. We had routines. Saturday morning coffee on the porch, Sunday night movie marathons, packing lunches the night before a busy workday. It was domestic bliss, the kind you see in commercials, the kind you aspire to. Or at least, it seemed that way to me. Mark was a good husband, or so I believed. He was supportive of my career, always listened when I needed to vent about work, brought me flowers sometimes for no reason. He was affectionate, attentive. We had a healthy relationship, or I thought we did. There were no major fights, no screaming matches, just the usual minor disagreements couples have, quickly resolved. We talked about having kids someday, about traveling the world when we retired. We were planning a future. Our future. Looking back, there were signs, weren't there? Little things I brushed off. Late nights at the office that became more frequent. A new phone that was suddenly password protected when his old one wasn't. A slight hesitation when I asked who he was texting. Things that felt like tiny pebbles in my shoe, annoying, but not enough to stop walking. I told myself I was being paranoid. He was working hard. His job was demanding. Everyone needs privacy, right? You build trust with someone. You don't question every little thing. That's what a healthy relationship is built on. Or is it? Hindsight is always 20/20, right? But tell me, honestly, if you felt that little knot in your stomach, that tiny whisper of doubt, would you listen? Or would you do what I did and tell yourself you were being silly? What would you have done? Let me know below. I chose to trust. I chose to believe in the man I married, the life we were building. I chose to ignore the quiet voice that sometimes asked if everything was truly as perfect as it seemed. And maybe that was my first mistake. Maybe I was too comfortable, too complacent. Maybe I didn't want to see what was right in front of me. The days leading up to that morning were normal, mundane even. We had dinner together, watched TV, went to bed. The next morning was a Tuesday, a regular Tuesday. Mark had an early meeting, so he needed his lunch packed. It was part of the routine. While he was in the shower, I went into the kitchen. The morning light was just starting to fill the room. The air smelled like coffee and toast from breakfast earlier. It was quiet, peaceful. I took out the bread, the turkey, the cheese. I was humming softly to myself, thinking about my own day ahead, a big presentation I had to give. My mind was on spreadsheets and meeting notes, not on impending disaster. I was at the counter, spreading mayo on the bread, the plastic baggie for the sandwich rustling softly. That's when I heard footsteps. Not Mark's usual heavy tread, lighter and laughing. A woman's laugh. It wasn't a sound I expected to hear in my house at that hour on a Tuesday morning. My blood ran cold before I even turned around. Everything seemed to slow down. The sound of the humming refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, the gentle rustle of the sandwich bag. It all faded into a dull roar in my ears. And then I turned. And then I turned. And there they were. Right there. In my kitchen. The kitchen where I made coffee every morning, where we ate dinner almost every night, where I'd baked birthday cakes for his family. Right there, by the refrigerator, bathed in that same morning light I'd just been appreciating. Mark and her. They were kissing. Standing there, locked in a kiss, oblivious. Or maybe not oblivious. Maybe they just didn't care. Not about me, anyway. She had her arms around his neck, her fingers tangled in the short hair at the nape of his neck. He had one hand on her back, pulled her close, and his other hand was resting on the handle of my refrigerator. The one with the kids' drawings still stuck to the side with magnets, even though the kids were grown. Her eyes were closed. His were too. They were completely lost in it, in each other. And I was standing there, holding a slice of bread with mayo on it, a plastic sandwich baggie rustling in my other hand. My brain just stopped. It was like watching a movie, but the actors were people I knew, people I lived with. But it wasn't a movie. It was real. It was happening. Right there. The silence that followed was deafening. My humming stopped. The rustling of the baggie stopped. The world just froze. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the bread. I just stood there and stared. My eyes scanned the scene. Her hair, it was long and dark. I remembered seeing her at a work function once, from a distance. I never knew her name. Never spoke to her. And there she was, in my kitchen, kissing my husband. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few seconds. They didn't notice me at first. They were too engrossed. And then Mark shifted slightly. His eyes fluttered open, and he saw me. The color drained from his face. Instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. His hand dropped from her back. He stumbled back a step, pulling away from her. She opened her eyes then, startled by his sudden movement. And she saw me, too. Her face went from blissfully unaware to something I couldn't quite read. Shock? Guilt? A little bit of defiance, maybe? I don't know. It was a blur. Still, I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet felt glued to the floor. My chest felt tight, like there was a lead weight pressing down on it. The bread with mayo felt heavy in my hand. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. Here I was, trying to perform a basic act of wifely duty, packing his lunch, and he was doing that. In my kitchen. With her. Mark stammered something. My name? An excuse? I don't remember the exact words. They sounded garbled, distant. My ears were ringing. All I could focus on was the image of them kissing, the image of her in my kitchen. It was seared into my brain. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, looking from him to me, her face pale. She adjusted her clothes, smoothed down her dress, a dress I hadn't seen before. Where had she come from? How long had she been here? My mind started racing, asking questions I didn't want the answers to. Had this happened before? Was this a regular thing? While I was asleep? While I was at work? While I was packing his lunch? Mark took another step towards me. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, shaky. "It's not what it looks like." Oh, but it was. It was exactly what it looked like. It looked like my husband was kissing another woman in my kitchen while I was making him a turkey sandwich. It looked like my life was falling apart in the most mundane, ordinary room in my house. I finally found my voice, but it wasn't the voice I expected. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was just flat, empty. "Get out," I said. My gaze was fixed on her. I wasn't talking to him. Not yet. She hesitated. Looked at Mark. He looked panicked. "Just go," he muttered to her. She finally moved. She grabbed a bag that was sitting on the counter, her bag, I guess. She didn't look at me again. She just walked past me, her head down, and headed towards the back door, the one we rarely used, the one that led out to the garden path and the side gate. I watched her go. The sound of the door clicking shut seemed incredibly loud in the silence she left behind. And then it was just me and him in the kitchen. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words, with betrayal, with the sudden gaping hole that had just opened up in my reality. He tried to approach me again. "Sarah, please, let me explain." Explain what? Explain why he was kissing another woman? Explain why he did it here? Now? There was no explanation that could make this okay. Nothing he could say would erase the image I had just seen. I finally looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I had built a life with. The father of my children. He looked pathetic. Scared. Caught. Not remorseful, not really. Just caught. "Don't," I said, holding up the hand with the sandwich bread. It was still there. The symbol of my normal, routine morning, now completely shattered. "Don't say anything." My mind was working now. Fast. Too fast. What do you do in this situation? Scream? Cry? Throw things? My instinct wasn't any of those things. My instinct was to shut down, to process, to figure out what came next. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that next was going to be completely different from everything that had come before. I looked down at the bread in my hand. It seemed ridiculous, packing his lunch, for a man who was betraying me moments before. I tossed the bread into the sink. It landed with a soft splat. He flinched. "Sarah, I need you to leave," I said. My voice was still flat, but there was an edge to it now. An ice-cold edge. Now. "Leave? Sarah, where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," I said, turning my back on him. I walked to the counter, where the sandwich fixings were still laid out. The turkey, the cheese, the lettuce. Everything looked sickeningly normal. I started putting things away, mechanically. The fridge door opened and closed. The plastic containers clicked shut. My hands were steady. Too steady. It was like I was watching myself from outside my body. He stood there for a moment, silent. I could feel his eyes on my back. The tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, I heard him move. Footsteps retreating. Towards the front door this time. I didn't turn around. I didn't watch him go. I just kept putting the groceries away, putting my life away, piece by piece. I heard the front door open, then close. And then silence again. A different kind of silence. An empty silence. The silence of a house that had just been fundamentally broken. I finished putting the food away. The kitchen was quiet again. The morning light was still there, but it felt different now, tainted. The air didn't smell like coffee and toast anymore. It smelled like betrayal. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the sandwich baggie still crumpled in my hand. I looked around. At the counter where they had stood. At the refrigerator handle his hand had been resting on. At the back door she had left through. This room, the heart of our home, was now a crime scene. A scene of emotional violence, and I was standing in the wreckage, alone. With a day ahead of me that was supposed to include a big presentation, spreadsheets, and meeting notes. Instead, it held this gaping, raw wound. This absolute, undeniable proof that the life I thought I had was a lie. I walked over to the sink and rinsed the mayo off the bread. I threw the bread away. I threw the sandwich baggie away. I wasn't packing him lunch, not ever again. I stood there for a long time just breathing, trying to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other, trying to figure out how to function, how to be a person after seeing something like that, how to go from a normal Tuesday morning to this. The shift was so sudden, so brutal. One minute I was humming, thinking about my presentation. The next, my world had shattered. I looked at the clock on the wall. Time hadn't stopped for me. It kept ticking, relentlessly. The day was still happening. I still had to go to work. I still had to give that presentation. How? How was I supposed to do any of that? I walked out of the kitchen. The house felt different now, smaller, colder. Every room felt like it held a secret I didn't want to know. Every object felt like a reminder of the life I had lost, the life that had been a performance, a charade. For how long? I went upstairs. The bedroom door was open. It looked normal. Too normal. The bed was unmade, just like we'd left it. Mark's side of the closet was still full of his clothes. His toothbrush was still in the holder in the bathroom. Everything was still there. But nothing was the same. I sat on the edge of the bed. My side. It felt like the only safe space left in the house. I just sat there, and I started to think. Not about what had happened, not about him, not about her, but about what I was going to do. What I was going to do next. Because I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something else, something hard, something I never expected, but something I had to face, head on. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I would face it. Alone. The silence in the room was deafening. Not just the absence of noise, but the weight of everything unsaid, everything hidden. Sitting there, on the edge of my side of the bed, felt like being on an island. The rest of the house was contaminated. My mind was a mess. It kept replaying the moment in the kitchen, the sound of their voices, the image of them together. But then it would jump to other things, little things, times he was late coming home from work, times he was distant, lost in thought, conversations that seemed innocent at the time, about colleagues, about events. Now they felt different, like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving until the picture was complete, and it was a picture I never wanted to see. The practicalities started to creep in. How long had this been going on? Was it serious? Was it just a kiss? Or was it more? The title of his video, the way she was looking at him. It felt serious. It felt like it had been going on for a while. What about the house, our finances, our friends, our families? It was like a dam had broken, and all these questions were flooding my brain, each one colder and heavier than the last. How do you even begin to untangle two lives that have been woven together for so long? I stayed there for a long time. I don't know how long. Hours, maybe. The light outside changed. The room got darker. I didn't turn on a light. I just sat in the growing dusk, letting the reality sink in. It was like mourning a death, but the person was still alive, just gone from my life as I knew it. The future I thought I had, the security I felt, the trust, all of it was gone in an instant, replaced by this hollow ache in my chest and this cold certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Eventually, the cold started to seep into my bones, or maybe it was just the emotional chill. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I had to move. I had to do something. Sitting there wasn't going to change anything. It wasn't going to unhappen what I had seen. It wasn't going to erase the image from my mind. Getting up felt like lifting a lead weight. My legs were stiff. My body felt foreign, heavy, disconnected. I walked out of the bedroom down the stairs. The house was silent. Too silent. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to break down, to scream, to cry. But I didn't. Not yet. I felt strangely numb, overlaid with that rising anger. I went back into the kitchen. The mug was still in the sink. The crumbs were still on the counter where I'd been making sandwiches. The cutting board was still out. It was exactly as I'd left it, frozen in time. But the air felt thick, heavy with the memory of what had happened there. The audacity of it. Right there, in my kitchen, the heart of our home, while I was literally packing his lunch, preparing food for him, caring for him, while they were. The sheer disrespect. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, but in the casual, brazen way they had done it. In my space, in my sanctuary. That's when the anger started to build. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, steady burn deep in my gut. It wasn't the hot, messy kind of anger, but a cold, hard resolve. They thought they could do this, violate my home, violate my trust. While I was caring for him, providing for him, no, not acceptable, not okay, not ever. This wasn't just about a kiss. This was about a fundamental breach of everything we had built. The anger gave me a strange kind of clarity. It cut through the confusion and the sadness. It gave me focus. Okay, I thought. Okay, this is happening, this is real. What am I going to do about it? I wasn't just going to sit there and let my life fall apart. I wasn't going to be a passive bystander in my own destruction. I needed information. I needed a plan. I needed to protect myself. And I needed to understand what my options were. My first thought was to call someone, a friend, my sister, my mom. But then I stopped. I wasn't ready to talk about it yet, to say the words out loud, to make it real to someone else, to hear their pity or their shock or their advice. I needed to process it myself first. I needed to figure out what I wanted to do, what I felt was right, not what someone else thought I should do. This was my life, my mess, and I needed to take ownership of the first steps. So, I didn't call anyone. Not yet. Instead, I went to my office, my home office, tucked away in the corner of the house. It felt like another safe space, a place where I handled my business, my work, the part of my life that was separate from all of this. I sat down at my desk. The computer screen was dark. I turned it on. The familiar hum was a small comfort in the overwhelming quiet of the house. What do you do when your life implodes? You start gathering the pieces. You start looking for a way forward. You start researching. I knew I needed legal advice. That was the first concrete step. I didn't know any lawyers. We'd never needed one for anything like this. We had a will, but that was it. I didn't even know where to start looking. Family law, divorce lawyers. It all felt so clinical, so final, like admitting defeat before the fight had even begun. But I knew it was necessary. I couldn't navigate this blind. I opened a web browser. My hands were shaking slightly as I typed, "Divorce lawyer, my city." The search results came up. Pages and pages of names, websites, promises of help during difficult times. It felt overwhelming. How do you choose someone to help you navigate the end of your marriage, the potential destruction of your family, the division of everything you've built together? It felt impossible to pick just one name from a screen. I started clicking on links, reading profiles, looking at pictures, trying to get a sense of who these people were. Could I trust them? Would they understand? Would they fight for me? It felt like such a vulnerable thing, to lay bare the most painful parts of your life to a stranger. It was late now. The house was completely dark outside the glow of the computer screen. I was still in the clothes I'd been wearing that morning. The morning that felt like a lifetime ago. The morning when I still believed in my life, in my marriage, in him. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Emotional exhaustion, physical exhaustion. Every muscle ached. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. But I couldn't stop. I felt a sense of urgency. I needed to understand my position. I needed to know what I was up against. I needed to arm myself with knowledge. I read articles about separation, about division of assets, about alimony, about custody, even though we didn't have kids. Words and concepts that had never been part of my vocabulary before. They felt alien, cold. They reduced my life, our life, to numbers and legal terms. It was jarring, but necessary. But beneath the coldness, there was a growing sense of determination. I wasn't going to be a victim. They had done this to me, yes, but I wasn't going to let it define me. I was going to figure this out. I was going to protect myself. I was going to build a new life, even if it wasn't the one I had planned. I spent hours online that night, researching lawyers, researching the process, trying to educate myself. It was like studying for the most important and most painful test of my life, a test I hadn't signed up for, a test I never wanted to take. I made a list of potential lawyers. I wrote down questions I needed to ask. I tried to organize the chaos in my head into something manageable, something actionable, something concrete I could hold on to. As the sun started to rise, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and pink, I was still sitting there. My eyes were dry, my body ached, but my mind felt clearer. Not okay, not healed, but focused. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by this quiet, cold resolve. I had a list. I had a plan. The first step was to make a call, to set up a consultation, to talk to someone who knew how to handle this kind of situation, someone who could tell me what my rights were, what my options were, what the next steps looked like. It felt like a monumental step, admitting that it was over, admitting that I needed help, admitting that I couldn't fix this myself. But I knew, deep down, that it was the right step, the necessary step, the first step towards reclaiming my life. I saved the list. I closed the browser. I sat back in my chair and just breathed for a moment. The house was starting to wake up with the dawn light. The birds were starting to sing outside, but it still felt different. It would always feel different now. The innocence was gone, but I wasn't just sitting there anymore, paralyzed by shock and pain. I had taken action. Small action, maybe. Just research and a list. But it was a start. It was the beginning of taking back control. The beginning of building something new out of the ruins of the old. The thought of facing him, of talking about this, was terrifying. The thought of facing her was... I didn't even have a word for it yet. Rage, disgust, a cold fury. But I knew I couldn't hide. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I had to face it. All of it. The truth, the pain, the mess. And I had a plan to do it. A plan that started with a name on a list and a phone call I had to make. Soon. Very soon. Before I lost my nerve. The plan. Yes, the plan. It felt both impossibly huge and ridiculously small at the same time. A name on a list, a phone call. That was it. The first tangible action. I looked at the clock. It was still early, too early to call anyone professional, but not too early to think, not too early to brace myself. I needed coffee. Strong coffee. The kind that makes your hands tremble a little, but clears the fog in your head. As I walked into the kitchen, the scene from the day before flashed behind my eyes. Him. Her. In this very room. Where I made breakfast every morning, where I paid bills, where our kids drew pictures on the table. It felt violated, tainted. I wanted to scrub the air clean. I made the coffee, the mundane ritual, a strange comfort in the chaos. The smell filled the room, grounding me. I sat at the island, the same island they had stood beside, and pulled out my phone. Not to call yet. Just to look at the list again. The lawyer's name. A few notes I'd scribbled about initial consultation fees, areas of expertise, family law, obviously. Someone who dealt with this. Divorce. Adultery. The word tasted bitter. I thought about what I needed to say. How do you condense years of a life, a marriage, into a few minutes on the phone with a stranger? How do you explain that you found out your husband was cheating because you saw him kissing another woman in your own kitchen while you were packing his lunch? It sounded like something out of a bad movie, but it was my life. The truth was, I didn't just need a lawyer. I needed someone to tell me what the hell to do. Someone who knew the rules when the world you thought you lived in had just shattered. Someone who could tell me how to protect myself, my kids, Everything I hadn't realized was suddenly vulnerable. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot and strong, just right. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over his name. Should I call him? Should I wake him up and confront him right now? Scream? Cry? Throw things? Every cell in my body screamed yes, to unleash the fury and pain that was coiling in my gut. But the logical part, the part that had made the list and the plan, said no, not yet. Not until I knew what my rights were. Not until I had a strategy. Confrontation without preparation felt like walking into a battle unarmed. I spent the next hour just sitting there, the silence of the house amplifying the turmoil in my head. I thought about the other woman. Her. What was her name again? I'd seen it on the saved contact in his phone, the one with the stupid heart emoji. It was unremarkable, just a name. But now it was a name etched into my memory, tied forever to the image of them together. Who was she? How long had this been going on? Did she know about me, about the kids? The questions swirled, each one a tiny shard of glass twisting in the wound. I felt a wave of nausea. This was too much, too fast. I wanted to go back to yesterday morning, before I saw them, before the world tilted on its axis. But there was no going back, only forward, through this mess. Finally, the clock ticked past 9 a.m. Business hours. My hand trembled as I dialed the number from my list. It rang. Once, twice. A receptionist answered, her voice bright and professional. Law offices of lawyer's name. How can I help you? My voice came out shaky. Yes, I need to schedule a consultation. About a family matter. She asked for my name, my number, a brief description of the issue. How brief could I be? It's a marital issue, I managed, involving infidelity. She was calm, efficient. Okay, I understand. We have availability next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Does that work for you? Next Tuesday? That felt like a lifetime away. Is there anything sooner? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. It's somewhat urgent. She checked her schedule again. Let me see. We had a cancellation. I could fit you in tomorrow morning. 9:30 a.m. Tomorrow. That was better. Still not right now, but better. Yes, I said quickly. Yes, that works. Tomorrow at 9:30. She confirmed the details, gave me the address, told me what documents to bring if I had any. I hung up the phone and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. The call was made. The appointment was set. Another small step. But the knot in my stomach remained. Now I had to get through today. And tonight. And tomorrow morning before the meeting. How was I supposed to act? Should I pretend everything was normal? Should I confront him before the meeting? After? What about the kids? They would be home from school soon. Their innocent presence felt like a shield and a burden all at once. How could I protect them from this? How could I act like their mom, the steady rock, when I felt like I was crumbling inside? I heard the garage door open. He was home. Early. My heart leaped into my throat. Was he coming to confess? Had he sensed something was wrong? Or was he just home? I stood up, my legs feeling wobbly. I needed to pull myself together. Fast. I walked out of the kitchen, trying to project an air of normalcy I was miles away from feeling. He was standing in the hallway, loosening his tie. He looked normal. Tired, maybe, but normal. The sight of him, knowing what he had done, sent a fresh wave of anger and hurt through me. Hey, he said, his voice casual. Didn't expect me home so early, huh? Finished up quicker than I thought? I managed a weak smile. Oh, yeah, okay. He walked towards me, leaning in for a kiss. Every instinct screamed at me to flinch away, to push him, to scream, "How dare you?" But I couldn't, not yet. I held my breath and let him kiss my cheek. It felt like a betrayal of myself, but I needed to keep up the facade. Just for a little while longer, until I knew what to do. until I had my plan fully in motion. "Everything all right?" he asked, looking at me a little more closely. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had he seen something in my eyes? "Yeah," I lied, forcing another smile. "Just thinking about dinner." He seemed to accept that. He talked about his day as he headed towards the bedroom to change. I listened, or pretended to, my mind racing. How could he act like this? How could he stand there, talking about his boring day after kissing another woman in our kitchen yesterday? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I retreated back to the kitchen, needing space to breathe. The coffee was cold now. I poured it out and stood by the sink, looking out the window at the backyard. The swing set stood empty, waiting for the kids. A bird landed on the feeder. Life outside the house was going on, oblivious to the earthquake that had just happened within its walls. I had to be strong. For myself. For my kids. I had taken the first step by making that list. The second step was making the call and setting the appointment. The next step was getting through the rest of today, acting like everything was fine, and then going to that meeting tomorrow morning, getting the information I needed, getting the strategy. Because I wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. I wasn't going to be the blindsided wife who quietly faded away. He had made his choice. She had made hers. And now, I was going to make mine. And it was going to be on my terms. The thought felt like a tiny spark of warmth in the cold, empty space that had opened up inside me. A flicker of determination. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Just like the list. Just like the phone call. It was a start. Okay, so I got through the rest of that day. Somehow. I don't honestly know how I did it. It was like I was watching myself from outside my body, going through the motions. Making dinner, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. Every smile I faked felt like a crack in my soul. Every time one of the kids laughed, it was like a little pinprick in my heart, reminding me of what was at stake, of what was being threatened. He was there, of course, in the same house. We didn't talk. Not really, just surface stuff. "Did you get the mail? What's for dinner?" It was the most surreal experience of my life, living a lie in real time while the truth was a cold, hard weight in my stomach. I kept replaying things in my head. Everything he'd ever said, everything he'd ever done, looking for clues I'd missed, for signs I'd ignored. And there were some, I think. Little things that had felt off at the time, but I'd brushed aside. Told myself I was being silly. Or maybe they were just normal marriage things, you know? The kind of bumps you hit that you work through. Only this wasn't a bump. This was a cliff. That night was long. The longest night of my life, probably. Sleep was impossible. My mind just wouldn't turn off. It raced from anger to fear to confusion to a kind of numb despair. I kept thinking about the kids, about their faces, about their future. And that's what kept bringing me back to that flicker of determination. I wasn't going to let this destroy everything. I had to fight. For them. For me. Waking up the next morning felt like surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. The dread was immediate, a physical ache in my chest. But beneath it was that resolve, still small, but there. I got the kids ready for school, went through the morning routine on autopilot. Kissed them goodbye at the bus stop, watching them walk away, their backpacks bouncing, completely unaware of the storm that was gathering. And then I had to get ready. Ready to step into the unknown. Getting dressed felt significant, like putting on armor. I remember looking in the mirror, trying to see the woman I was before all this, trying to find her strength. She felt pretty buried under layers of shock and pain. But I found a little bit of her, enough to put one foot in front of the other. The drive to the lawyer's office was a blur. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My thoughts were a chaotic mess. What was I even going to say? How do you condense years of a life, a marriage, into a few sentences for a stranger? How do you explain the gut punch of betrayal? I found the building, parked the car, and just sat there for a minute, taking deep breaths, trying to steady myself. This felt like crossing a threshold, Like once I walked through those doors, there would be no going back. And I knew, deep down, that was true. There was no going back to the way things were. Ever. I finally got out of the car and walked in. The office was quiet, hushed. The air conditioning was cold. It felt sterile, professional, completely separate from the messy, emotional reality I was living. I gave my name to the receptionist, and she led me to a small conference room. I sat at the table, feeling incredibly small and exposed. And then she walked in. Ms. Jenkins. She looked capable, solid. Her handshake was firm. She had kind eyes, but there was a no-nonsense air about her. We sat down, and she just looked at me, waiting. And I started talking. The words came out in a rush, sometimes stumbling, sometimes clearer than I expected. I told her everything, about finding the messages, about the list, about the appointment, about the kids, about the fear and the anger and the desperate need to protect my family, to protect myself. She listened without interruption, just nodded occasionally, took a few notes. When I finally finished, the silence hung in the air for a moment. It felt heavy. Then she started asking questions. Practical questions. Dates, finances, assets, liabilities. Questions that forced me to think about the logistics of dismantling a life, not just the emotional wreckage. And as she talked, as she explained the process, the potential timelines, the legal complexities, it was overwhelming. Like standing at the foot of a mountain you have to climb, and someone is showing you all the sheer cliffs and treacherous paths you didn't see from a distance. She laid out the options, the best case, the worst case, the likely scenario. She talked about custody, about support, about dividing property. It wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about restructuring an entire life, 2 lives, maybe more. And it was going to be hard, really hard. Emotionally, financially, in every possible way. Hearing all that, it was like another punch. You think you're ready, and then you hear the reality. Dealing with all of that, the emotional and the practical. How do you even begin to navigate something like this? What steps would you prioritize? Facing something like this, feeling completely overwhelmed, trying to figure out the right path forward. What would be the hardest part for you? What's the first thing you'd tackle? Let me know below. Ms. Jenkins was very clear. This was going to be a process. It wasn't going to be fast, and it wasn't going to be easy, but she also spoke with a quiet confidence that was somehow reassuring. She said she could help me, that we could get through this, that we would figure out a strategy. We talked about the immediate next steps, things I needed to gather, information I needed to find. Practical things that felt impossible to focus on when my world was still spinning. But she broke it down into manageable pieces, 1 step at a time, just like I had done with the list, with the phone call. I left her office after what felt like hours, but was probably only an hour and a half. My head was buzzing with information. My heart felt heavy, but there was also a strange sense of purpose. I had taken another step, a big one. The mountain was still there, daunting and huge. But now I had a guide, and I had a map, even if it was just a preliminary one. The fight wasn't over. It had just officially begun. Leaving Ms. Jenkins' office was like stepping back into the world, but the world felt different now. Sharper edges, less forgiving. The air outside felt heavy, even though it was a clear day. My head was still buzzing, like I'd just been through some kind of intense simulation. Ms. Jenkins had given me a list, a physical list, on her letterhead. It felt official, real, and terrifying. The first few days were a blur of trying to function while also starting to gather the things on that list. Financial statements, tax returns, deeds, account numbers, emails, texts, every single piece of paper, every digital trail that documented our life together, our shared finances, our plans. Going through it all was agonizing. It wasn't just numbers on a page, it was a history I thought I knew, a future I thought we were building. And now I was sifting through the wreckage. Finding some of the documents was hard because he had always handled certain things. He was the one who dealt with the investment accounts, the retirement funds. I knew the basics, knew we had them, but I didn't have the login details, the specific statements. It required asking him or trying to access things that were jointly held, but he controlled. Every interaction was strained, awkward, laced with unspoken accusations and hurt. He acted defensive, sometimes angry, sometimes just cold, like I was being difficult, like I was the one making things messy by pursuing legal action. It was baffling, the sheer lack of accountability. Going through emails was even worse than the financial stuff. It wasn't just about finding evidence, it was about reliving moments, seeing old travel confirmations, dinner reservations, silly inside jokes we'd shared digitally. And then, interspersed with that, the cold reality of finding things that hinted at what had been happening behind my back. Nothing explicit, not yet, but little things that made my stomach clench. Emails about late nights at the office that now took on a sinister new meaning. Texts that were just a little too friendly, a little too frequent, with her name attached. Each one was a tiny paper cut, adding to the deep wound that was already there. There were days I just couldn't do it. I'd sit at the dining room table, a pile of papers in front of me, and the tears would just come. Big, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. The betrayal felt so complete, so absolute. It wasn't just that he had cheated, it was the depth of the deception, the way he had looked me in the eye, shared our bed, eaten the food I cooked, while building this other life, this other connection, with someone else. And not just anyone else, but someone who was supposedly a friend, someone I had welcomed into our home. That felt like a second layer of betrayal, a violation of a different kind of trust. Ms. Jenkins had warned me it would be emotionally draining. She said to take breaks, to not try and do it all at once, but it felt urgent. Every day that passed felt like a day he could be hiding something, moving money, making plans that would hurt me further. The paranoia was a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. I talked to my closest friends, the ones I had confided in initially. They were amazing, offering support, listening patiently as I rehashed the same painful details over and over. They brought me food, helped me sort through some of the less emotionally charged documents, just sat with me so I wasn't alone in that house that suddenly felt too big, too empty, and too full of ghosts. My family was supportive too, but there was a different dynamic there. More protective, more outraged on my behalf. Sometimes their anger felt validating, but sometimes it just added to the overall sense of chaos. One of the hardest things was navigating the house itself. Every room held a memory. The kitchen where I'd packed his lunches, the living room where we'd watched movies on the couch, our bedroom. Just being there felt suffocating. Ms. Jenkins had mentioned the possibility of one of us moving out, but that felt like another monumental task, another disruption. And frankly, I wasn't ready to be forced out of my own home. Not yet. Not until I had a clearer picture of what the future held. So we coexisted in a tense, fragile silence. He stayed in the guest room. We avoided each other in the hallways, in the kitchen. It was a surreal, painful existence. Like living with a stranger who knew all your secrets, all your vulnerabilities, and had used them against you. I spent hours meticulously going through bank statements, credit card bills, trying to piece together the timeline, trying to see if there were financial breadcrumbs I had missed before. It was tedious, painstaking work. But every now and then, I'd find something. A charge at a restaurant I didn't recognize, a hotel booking that didn't align with a supposed business trip, a gift bought that wasn't for me. Each discovery was a fresh wave of pain, but also a confirmation. A confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right, that this wasn't just a momentary lapse, but a sustained, deliberate deception. Ms. Jenkins had explained the legal process: discovery, negotiations, potentially mediation, maybe even trial, though she stressed that was rare. It all sounded overwhelming, like a foreign language. My focus remained on the immediate tasks: gather the information, build the case. I remember one afternoon, I found a small notebook tucked away in a drawer in his office. It wasn't a diary, nothing like that. Just a notebook where he jotted down random thoughts, to-do lists, phone numbers, and buried within it a few lines that stopped my heart. Not about her directly, but about future plans that clearly didn't include me. Vague references to a fresh start, to leaving the past behind. Finding that felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just an affair, it was a plan to leave. He hadn't just cheated, he had already checked out of our marriage, already moved on in his mind, long before I knew anything was wrong. That realization was devastating in a different way. It made the betrayal feel even deeper, even more calculated. I took the notebook, the emails, the financial documents, everything I could find, and organized it as best I could. I created folders, spreadsheets, timelines. It felt like building a fortress of evidence, piece by painful piece. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally. There were days I felt like giving up, like maybe it would be easier to just walk away from everything and start over with nothing. But then I would think about what I was fighting for. Not just the material things, though those were important, but for justice, for accountability, for not letting him and her get away with destroying my life without consequence. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, my dignity, my future. It was about standing up for myself after being knocked down so completely. Ms. Jenkins had said this would be a fight, and she was right. I was in the trenches now, armed with paperwork and a broken heart, trying to navigate a legal system that felt cold and impersonal, all while my personal life was in utter ruins. It was a strange dichotomy, the clinical nature of the legal process juxtaposed with the raw, messy pain of betrayal. But I kept going, one document at a time, one email at a time, putting the pieces together even though I knew the final picture would be heartbreaking. The legal process ground on, slow and relentless. Every email from Ms. Jenkins felt like another blow, another piece of my life being dissected under a harsh, fluorescent light. We were deep into the discovery phase now, which meant answering endless questions about everything from our finances to our personal lives, all of it designed to build a case or tear one down. His lawyer, a slick, aggressive man named Mr. Peterson, seemed to delight in making things as difficult as possible. He'd challenge every piece of evidence we presented, try to twist my words, paint me as the unreasonable party. It was infuriating. Ms. Jenkins warned me this would happen. She said his side would try to muddy the waters, to distract from the core issues of betrayal and financial misconduct by focusing on petty details or trying to portray me negatively. And they did. They questioned my spending habits, my career choices, even my relationships with mutual friends. It felt like they were trying to find anything at all, to discredit me. It was invasive and humiliating, having to lay bare the intimate details of my life for these lawyers to pick apart. The depositions were the worst. Sitting across from Mr. Peterson, with a court reporter typing away, felt like an interrogation. He'd ask the same question multiple ways, trying to trip me up. He'd bring up old arguments, misunderstandings, things I hadn't thought about in years, trying to make them seem significant or like proof of my supposed flaws. And then there was the preparation for his deposition. Going over every lie, every instance of deception, every financial discrepancy with Ms. Jenkins was like reliving the whole nightmare over and over. We'd spend hours going through bank statements, credit card bills, emails, text messages. Each one was a tiny shard of glass in my heart, but I had to examine it, analyze it, understand its legal significance. There was one particular set of emails that really hit me hard. They were between him and her, discussing plans, making arrangements. Not just about meeting up, but about their future, about things they would do once the divorce was finalized. It was sickeningly casual, like they were planning a vacation, not dismantling a life. Reading those words, seeing how little regard they had for me, for our history, for the promises he'd made, it stripped away any last shred of doubt or hope I might have clung to. This wasn't a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, deliberate plan. We also uncovered evidence of him diverting funds, small amounts at first, then larger ones, to a separate account. Money that was supposed to be for our joint expenses, for our savings, was disappearing. It was further proof of his deceit, not just emotionally but financially. It validated my suspicions, but it also made the betrayal feel even deeper. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was stealing from me, from our shared future. Despite the emotional toll, there was a strange sense of empowerment that came with uncovering the truth. Each piece of evidence we found, each lie we exposed, felt like I was taking back a little bit of the power he had stolen from me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a participant in exposing the truth. I was fighting back. But the fight was exhausting. I wasn't sleeping well. My appetite was gone. I felt constantly on edge, waiting for the next piece of bad news, the next legal maneuver from his side. My friends and family were incredibly supportive, but there were some things you just couldn't explain, the specific kind of soul-deep weariness that comes from having your life picked apart in a courtroom. Ms. Jenkins remained my anchor. She was tough, smart, and unwavering in her belief in my case. She pushed me when I felt like giving up, reminded me what I was fighting for. She handled the legal strategy, the back and forth with Mr. Peterson, the technical details of the court filings. I just had to focus on providing the information, telling my truth, and trying to stay strong. We were approaching a critical point in the process. There was talk of mediation, a chance to potentially settle out of court, but based on Mr. Peterson's aggressive tactics and his client's apparent refusal to acknowledge the extent of his actions, it seemed unlikely we'd reach an agreement. It felt like we were inevitably heading towards trial, a prospect that filled me with dread and determination in equal measure. The thought of sitting in a courtroom, facing him and potentially her, having our private lives aired publicly, was terrifying. But the thought of letting them win, of letting them get away with it, was even more so. The legal bills were piling up, adding another layer of stress. Justice, I was learning, was incredibly expensive. Every phone call, every email, every document reviewed, every hour spent preparing for depositions, it all cost money. Money that, ironically, was part of what we were fighting over. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. I remember one particularly rough day. We had just finished reviewing some particularly damning emails, and I felt completely drained, raw. I wanted to scream, to cry, to just disappear. I called my best friend, barely able to speak through the lump in my throat. She just listened, let me vent, and then reminded me of my strength, of how far I had come. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, even though it often felt like it. As the legal battle intensified, so did the public whispers. Our divorce wasn't exactly front-page news, but in our social circle, it was the main topic of conversation. There were rumors, speculation, people taking sides. It added another layer of complexity, another source of stress. Navigating social events became tricky. Would I run into him? Would I run into her? How would people react? It felt like I was living in a fishbowl, my private pain on display for everyone to see and judge. Despite the challenges, I felt a growing sense of clarity. The fog of confusion and heartbreak was slowly lifting, replaced by a steely resolve. I knew what I wanted, and I knew I deserved it. I deserved justice, accountability, and a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. The path was long and difficult, but I was walking it, one step at a time, armed with the truth and the unwavering support of my legal team and loved ones. We were building a strong case, piece by painful piece, and I knew, deep down, that the truth would prevail. The fight was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. What came next was the grinding reality of the legal system. It's not like you see in the movies, all dramatic courtroom showdowns happening overnight. It's slow, it's meticulous, and it's emotionally draining. Our legal team, they were incredible. They worked tirelessly, sifting through documents, building timelines, preparing for depositions. every step felt like peeling back another layer of a very painful onion. We had meetings, lots of meetings, sitting across the table from these sharp, focused minds, talking about the most intimate failures of my life, the betrayal, the financial complexities. They asked questions, hard questions, designed to anticipate every possible angle the other side might take. We went over emails, texts, financial records. Things I never thought would see the light of day were being dissected, analyzed, used as evidence. It felt invasive, even though it was my own information. But it was necessary. We had to be prepared for anything. The other side, predictably, fought dirty. They tried to paint me as the unstable one, the jealous wife, the one who was overreacting. They twisted facts. They made accusations. It was infuriating, but my lawyers had warned me this would happen. They told me to stay focused, to trust the process, and not to get drawn into their mudslinging. Easier said than done when your character is being attacked. There were days I just wanted to scream, to lash out, to defend myself publicly. But I held back, following my lawyer's advice. We would fight this in court, where the truth mattered, not in the court of public opinion. As the legal process moved forward, an event loomed on the horizon, the annual city gala. It was a huge deal in our social circle, a major fundraiser that everyone who was anyone attended. Before all of this, it was an event David and I always went to together. Now the thought of attending filled me with dread and a weird sense of defiance. I knew they would be there. Of course they would. They were practically inseparable, flaunting their relationship openly now. My lawyers brought it up. The gala. It presented a unique opportunity. We had been trying to formally serve her with legal documents for weeks. She had been actively avoiding service, making it incredibly difficult. She wasn't a party to the divorce itself, but her actions were central to the case, and there were specific legal actions we needed to take involving her directly. Things related to her conduct, her interference, and potential legal consequences for her role in the situation. One of these was a restraining order. Not a restraining order in the sense of physical protection, though frankly, her behavior was becoming increasingly unsettling and aggressive in other ways, but a legal order designed to prevent her from continuing certain actions that were detrimental to my case and my peace of mind. Things related to harassment, dissemination of false information, and potentially interfering with my property. My lawyers explained that serving her at the gala was perhaps the most surefire way to guarantee service. It was a public event, heavily attended, and she would be there, visible and identifiable. There would be no denying she received the documents. The idea felt both strategic and incredibly daunting. The thought of confronting her in public at an event like that made my stomach churn. It felt dramatic, almost theatrical, and that wasn't really my style. I preferred to handle things quietly, privately, but my lawyers were firm. This was a legal necessity, a practical solution to a problem she had created by avoiding service. They assured me they would handle the actual service. I just needed to be present and potentially, depending on the exact strategy, the one to initiate the interaction where the service would occur. We discussed the logistics. How would it happen? Who would do it? My legal team planned it meticulously. A process server would be present, discreetly integrated into the event staff or attendees. I would approach her, perhaps exchange a few words, and at a specific signal, the server would step in and hand her the documents. It needed to be done correctly, according to strict legal protocol, for the service to be valid. The more we talked about it, the more I saw the cold, hard logic behind it. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about executing a necessary legal step efficiently and undeniably. The fact that it would happen in front of witnesses, in a place where they felt comfortable and untouchable, was a byproduct. But perhaps not an entirely unwelcome one. Maybe, just maybe, it would finally shatter the illusion they were living in. Preparing for that night was surreal. It wasn't just about picking out a dress, it was about steeling myself emotionally. I went through every possible scenario in my head. How would she react? How would David react? How would everyone else react? I practiced staying calm, staying composed, remembering why I was doing this. This wasn't personal revenge. It was a legal action, a step towards resolution and protecting myself. My friends were amazing during this time. They were nervous for me, but they supported my decision. They helped me get ready, distracting me with chatter and laughter, trying to ease the tension that was building inside me. As I put on the dress, did my hair and makeup, I felt like I was preparing for battle. Not a physical one, but a battle of wills, a public reclaiming of my dignity and my rights. The car ride to the gala felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding, my hands were clammy. I kept going over the plan in my mind. Find her, signal, serve her, stay calm. Don't engage beyond what's necessary. Remember the goal. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about moving forward, about ensuring justice was served, one step at a time. And this step, this public service of a restraining order, felt like a giant leap into the next phase of this long, difficult journey. We were almost there. The moment was approaching. Walking into that ballroom felt surreal. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the murmur of polite conversation. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, reflecting off polished floors and the elegant gowns and tuxedos of the guests. It was exactly the kind of place where you'd expect to find people pretending everything was perfect, even when it wasn't. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath the elegant fabric of my dress. I felt like an imposter, dressed up for a party but carrying a hand grenade in my purse, or rather, having one about to be delivered on my behalf. My friends stayed close initially, their presence a silent anchor. We mingled by the entrance for a few moments, just long enough for me to get my bearings and start scanning the crowd. It was like a game of Where's Waldo? Except Waldo was a woman who had fundamentally altered the course of my life, and finding her meant initiating a very public, very uncomfortable confrontation, albeit a legal one. My eyes darted from face to face, trying to appear casual, like I was just another guest admiring the decor or looking for the bar. But inside, every nerve ending was screaming. There, across the room, near one of the large draped windows. She was there. And he was with her naturally. They were talking to a small group of people, laughing. They looked comfortable, like they belonged there together, without a care in the world. Seeing them together in that setting, after everything, sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins, quickly followed by a surge of righteous anger that I had to tamp down instantly. This wasn't about emotion right now. It was about execution. I subtly shifted my position, making sure I was visible to the spot where the process server, dressed impeccably as one of the event's catering staff, was positioned, waiting for my signal. We had agreed on something simple. I would touch my hand to my necklace, a small, seemingly innocent gesture. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached up and clasped the pendant. I held it for just a second, long enough for him to see. Then, I watched. It felt like time slowed down. I saw him nod almost imperceptibly. He picked up a tray with a few empty glasses and began to move through the crowd, seemingly clearing tables, but his path was a direct line towards where she stood. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, of lawyers, of paperwork, of sleepless nights, and gut-wrenching decisions. As he approached their group, he paused, offering the tray as if to clear a glass. He leaned in slightly, speaking softly, just loud enough for her to hear, as we had rehearsed. I couldn't hear the words from across the room, but I knew what they were. Something along the lines of, "Excuse me, ma'am, I have some important documents for you." And then, I saw him extend the envelope. Her laughter died on her lips. Her eyes, which had been sparkling, went wide and fixed on the plain white envelope. I saw her hand shake as she reached out to take it. She looked confused at first, then wary. She opened it right there, pulling out the papers. As she scanned the first page, her face drained of all color. It was like watching a light switch get flipped off. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock, then something akin to panic. The people she had been talking to fell silent, their eyes following hers to the document. Whispers started, a ripple effect spreading outwards from their small group. All those polite conversations around them seemed to falter and die down as people turned their heads, sensing that something significant, something not part of the planned festivities, was happening. He turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion, then annoyance, and finally, as he likely saw the heading on the document, realization dawned on his face too. His mouth dropped open slightly. I could feel the eyes of people nearby starting to drift towards me. The woman standing calmly across the room who was clearly connected to this sudden drama. But I held my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I met their curious, shocked, even judgmental stares with a steady gaze. This wasn't a moment for shame or embarrassment. This was a moment for quiet strength. I had done nothing wrong. I was simply exercising my legal right to protect myself. She crumpled the papers slightly in her hand, her eyes darting frantically around the room as if looking for an escape route, or perhaps a hole to swallow her whole. She said something to him, her voice too low for me to hear, but her body language was frantic. He put a hand on her arm, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. I knew my part in this immediate scene was over. The service was complete. The message delivered. There was no need to engage further, to gloat or to explain. My presence had made the point. I turned slowly, giving one last look towards their stunned faces and the rapidly growing circle of onlookers. The elegant gala had just been momentarily frozen in time, a tableau of shock and scandal. My friends were already moving towards me, their faces etched with concern and anticipation. As I walked towards them, through the now noticeably quieter crowd, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The tension that had been building for weeks finally had a release valve, albeit a dramatic one. It wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was a crucial, undeniable step. I had faced the dragon, not with fire, but with paper and process. And in that moment, walking away from the epicenter of the storm I had just created, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in a very long time. The ground was shifting, the narrative was changing, and I was the one holding the pen. Walking towards my friends felt like crossing a finish line and stepping into a new kind of chaos all at once. They met me with hugs that were a little too tight, whispering questions and congratulations into my hair. We didn't linger. The air in that ballroom had become thick with unspoken accusations and rapidly spreading gossip. We made our way out, past the stunned faces, the hushed conversations, the security guards who suddenly seemed unsure whether to stop us or just watch. Stepping out into the cool night air felt like breathing again after being underwater for a long time. We got into a waiting car. One of my friends had thought ahead, bless her, and the moment the doors closed, the dam broke. Not tears, not yet, but a torrent of excited, overlapping questions. What happened? Did they say anything? Oh my God, their faces. We drove away from the glittering facade of the gala, leaving the storm behind, heading for a quiet, safe place where we could actually process what had just happened. That night, huddled together, the initial rush of adrenaline faded, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. We talked for hours, dissecting every second, every reaction. It felt surreal, like watching a movie you were somehow also starring in. But beneath the surrealism was the undeniable truth. The fight had officially begun. That moment at the gala wasn't the end. It was the opening salvo. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, media inquiries, and navigating the sudden, intense public scrutiny. The story exploded. My name, their names, the details of what I had done. It was everywhere. There were headlines, think pieces, endless online discussions. Support poured in from places I never expected, from strangers who had gone through similar things or who simply believed in standing up to powerful people. But there was also the backlash, the accusations, the attempts to smear my name and discredit my story. It was overwhelming, a constant barrage that tested every ounce of my resilience. The legal process was slow, frustrating, and incredibly expensive. It felt like a war fought in inches, with paperwork as the weapons and court dates as the battles. There were depositions, motions, endless back-and-forth arguments. They fought hard, of course. They had the resources, the connections, the sheer arrogance to believe they could bury me in legal technicalities and outlast my will. There were moments, many of them, when I felt completely overwhelmed, when the weight of it all felt too heavy to bear. There were days I wanted to just give up, to walk away and try to reclaim some semblance of a normal life, even if it meant letting them win. But then I would think about why I started. I would remember the pain, the injustice, the principle of it all. I would look at the faces of my friends, my family, the people who had stood by me, and I would find the strength to keep going. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about proving that you couldn't just use and discard people, that there had to be accountability, no matter how wealthy or powerful you were. Slowly, painstakingly, things started to shift. The evidence was undeniable. The truth, messy and painful as it was, began to surface. The legal pressure mounted. Public opinion, fueled by the facts that came out during the process, turned against them. Their carefully constructed image began to crumble under the weight of their own actions. Settlements were proposed, negotiations were had. It was a long, grueling process, but eventually we reached a resolution. It wasn't a Hollywood ending, no grand public apology or dramatic courtroom victory. It was a legal agreement, binding and confidential in many ways, but it achieved what I set out to do. It held them accountable. It acknowledged the wrong that had been done. And it provided a measure of justice, not just for me, but for the principle of standing up for yourself. Walking away from the final legal papers, signed and sealed, felt different from walking away from that gala. There was no adrenaline rush, just a quiet, profound sense of closure. The fight was over. The battle was won, not in the way I might have dreamed of in my angriest moments, but in a way that was real and lasting. Rebuilding life after something like that is a process. The scars are still there, invisible but felt. Trust is harder to come by. The world looks a little different, but the fear is gone. The power they held over me is broken. I learned so much about myself during that time, my strength, my resilience, my capacity to endure things I never thought I could. I learned who my true friends were, the ones who would stand in the fire with me. I learned that sometimes the only way out is through. Looking back now from the other side of the storm, it's hard to believe I was the same person who stood terrified in that ballroom, clutching those papers. The journey changed me fundamentally. It was painful, yes, but it was also empowering. I found my voice. I stood my ground. I fought for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. It cost me a lot, emotionally, financially, in terms of peace of mind for a long time. But I gained something invaluable, my freedom, my self-respect, and the knowledge that I could face down my biggest fears and survive. It makes you think about justice, doesn't it? About what it really means and how hard you have to fight for it sometimes. And even when you win, is it ever truly over? The memories, the impact, they linger. Sometimes I wonder, if you could go back, knowing everything you know now about the cost and the struggle, would you still do it? Would you still choose to fight? What would you do? Let me know below. For me, the answer is yes. 1,000 times yes. Because living with the silence, with the injustice, would have been a heavier burden than any fight. Life isn't perfect now. There are still challenges, still moments of reflection on what was lost. But there is also peace. There is strength. There is the quiet certainty that I faced the darkness and found my way back into the light. And that, more than any legal victory, is the real conclusion. It's not an ending, really, but a beginning. The beginning of a life lived on my own terms, free from the shadows of the past.